Okay, so if you've been paying close attention to the global AI and robotics slash automation race, you've probably seen this viral video of an autonomous truck doing its thing in China. Now, the latest estimates by around 2030 are that about 300 million workers will be displaced by AI, robotics, and the automation wave. And I'm talking across industries. In fact, it's a full blown race between the US and the Chinese economy. So it's time we talk about universal basic income for mortal humans like us. Will humanity's lifeline be UBI in the age of intelligent machines, or are we perhaps already too late? I'm joined by Scott Santens, founder and president of the Income to Support All Foundation, senior advisor to Humanity Forward, and the author of Let There Be Money. He's been one of the most prominent supporters of UBI since 2013. Also with me, Scott Walter, mechanical aerospace engineer and two-time founder of robotics companies. And joining us from Sweden is Gustav Andersson, hand surgeon and associate professor of anatomy. Welcome, gentlemen. Great to have you all. Let's talk UBI. So industrial automation has been around for a while, but I think the bigger question is that of mass inequality. So
Yeah.
what is it that you're seeing? Give us your 35,000 view of this entire disruption of the global economy and the global workforce.
From a really high level view, like you said, inequality is a big issue. I would zoom out all the way to the 1970s. And we would see this line that's just going steadily up. Productivity is just going up and up and up. And the same cannot be said of our incomes, wages. What people see from this is their share of the productivity is just minuscule compared to what the top 1% have been seeing for decades. There was a study that looked at this that determined that since the 1970s, about $79 trillion has gone mostly to the top 1% instead of where it would have gone to the bottom 90% had there not been, this decoupling of productivity and incomes. And if it had just, people had gotten their share of productivity growth. And so we're just looking at more of that. Like, we're going to see more and more productivity growth thanks to AI and robots. And we will see more and more inequality, just like we're already seeing. And I think we're already seeing the impacts of that. I would say decades of this impact has resulted in this erosion of democracies all around the world. And I think we're already at that kind of breaking point of, like, what is the population of people? Like, how are they going to respond to this? And I would say it's already negative response. So I just don't know how long things are going to keep going as they are before something really breaks.
Something breaks, right? So this productivity decoupling, as you call it. So we know that the policy is lagging, right? Generally, policymakers always try and catch up with emerging technologies and disruptive technologies. But why is it that they seem to be missing what's happening? And why is it that we don't have any real credible UBI program or talk about a UBI program? I mean, we've seen some sort of movement in Canada. We've seen some other experiments around the world, but there's no real credible action. Why is this? What are policymakers missing?
I would say that just in general, just people just want to assume that they don't have to do anything, like the inertia of how things are. And you just say, well, we don't really need to make any big changes. We've gone through this before, and new jobs will be created, and sure, people will lose jobs or won't be able to find jobs, but then they'll gain new skills, and they'll go to school, they'll learn new things, and they'll find those jobs, and everything will be great. And I just feel like it's really easy for people to kind of fall into that trap of thinking, and just kind of ignoring that even how people have been suffering for decades. Like, if you go to rural US, you just see, like, Main Street USA is completely dilapidated compared to what it was. There's measurements of like employment returns post Great Recession, and you see that people are basically in these smaller towns. They never escaped the Great Recession. Like things never improved for them once this like great financial crisis happened. So I think people are just kind of ignoring things. They have their heads buried in the sand and they're not experiencing, they're living in like a city where things are going well. They're surrounded by people thanks to high inequality. They're surrounded by people who are doing pretty well. If you're in the top 10%,
Yeah.
if you're college educated, if you're post grad, you're doing pretty well. And
What
it's
you're
just a
saying
different
sounds like
America.
you're describing the MAGA wave that brought Donald Trump back to power.
Yeah. I would say that was a key component of what happened there was just this people being left behind, their loss of economic security. They're watching their communities just kind of wither away. And then you have like the elites just saying, there's no problem. There's no problem. Everything's fine. And they just got fed up and they're angry. And I would say, it's completely understandably so.
You think it's also a fear of the like making people inactive, and this idea that if you give more handouts, they will not even strive to pull themselves up by bootstraps that they don't have, or
that's a capitalist view, and you're living in a socialist country.
Yeah, I mean, it's international phenomenon. Even here, I kind of struggle with the idea that do we really need a UBI in Sweden? Would we need it? And for me, it's become more of the what do you call it,
but you do have a very strong social net in Sweden.
Yes. So basically, right, if you lose your job, there is no risk of you starving in Sweden. You will have all the benefits you need, but we still have it's still coupled to the lack of employment. And if you get a job, you will not have this support anymore, of course. Whereas there are some benefits that we get, like child support, that is irrespective of our income. And one of the main winning factors of that in Sweden, I think, was that even if you earn $1 million a year or 100K a year, you get the same amount of money because it's connected to the child and not the parent itself. So that's where I kind of felt, okay, that I like that idea that irrespective of your income or your status, you would still get your basic income, and that might make it more palatable to people who would others say, why would I work to support someone else when they are not even trying?
But what's so weird about this conversation, though, too, is that we're still having it in response to automation. It's like we're talking about AI doing a lot more work for us and robots doing a lot more work for us and what happens to people without employment. And then as a response to that, we're saying, what if we gave people basic income? Would they work less? Like that doesn't really make sense to me to be doing that, but we're hearing it. And like, I get the argument that says, or the concern that says, okay, if people lose their jobs and there's fewer people who are employed, then like, how do they seek purpose without a job? Like, I understand that more because people are wondering, if robots are doing everything, what is it for humans to do? Like, okay, but the concern that people will refuse to do anything is really nonsensical to me. Like that shouldn't be part of the argument anymore, which is why I thought it was so weird from Sam Altman's his PI results. So the Sam Altman's PI results came out, last year, and that was a was it 3-4 year pilot? It was 3-year pilot, and you still saw people concerned about like, oh, it looked like there was a 2% on average reduction in hours worked and likelihood of being employed from this. And that actually, if you look at on a per year basis, that's like basically 8 days of paid vacation, which if you look at all the countries in the world, that still puts us at the absolute lowest. Like the second lowest is Japan with 10 days of paid vacation, and US is 0. So like, it's so small. It's such a small impact. And yet people still look at that and say, oh my gosh, we can't do this because it'll make people lazy. And yet the experiment was done by Sam Altman out of a concern of what happens due to automation. Like, it's just, it's so weird to me.
Do you think it's that people don't think, oh, I'm not going to be affected. It's everyone else, but I will not be automated away. So why should I
Yeah, that's a real issue too, is everyone thinks that their job is fine and the other people will lose their jobs. And so if you have a bunch of people like that, then it's the same kind of, issue. It's the same kind of thing, same kind of reasoning where people say that they themselves would not work less with a basic income, but other people would work less. It's always like they themselves are special and other people act totally differently.
Yeah. Okay, so one of the benefits of our discussions here on Over the Horizon is that I try and bring in an interdisciplinary approach to the conversations that we have. And one of the crown benefits is having access to the internet's go-to expert on humanoid robotics, although he's too humble to admit it openly. Scott, this is for you. Take a look at this video and tell us why everybody should be worried. This is just one company, bigger.
Yes.
I think it would be one of the top 3, if not amongst the top 2 AI and robotics companies. Not just robotics, AI and robotics. Their Helix AI is fantastic. We've seen it do work in the home as well now, doing laundry. This disruption is here. It's not a decade away. Why is it that it's not just policymakers in governments who should be paying attention, but it's also people around the world should wake up and understand this oncoming tsunami, as Elon Musk has called it so many times? What's going to give us the wake-up call, Scott?
Okay, it's the frog being slowly boiled. So automation's been around for a long time. So you go back to the Industrial Revolution, and at that time, it was extremely disruptive, which is why you saw a lot of disruptions in society and everything else. A lot of people lost their jobs. And then automation has kind of come in. It's become kind of part of our lives, and we expect it. But it's on a very slow growth trajectory. And if you go back to when the first industrial robot was installed, it was in 1961. This past year, there are about 500,000 industrial robots were installed worldwide since 1961. So that's a pretty slow growth if you think about, that what's going on in automation. So, well, we keep on automating. We're automating at a very steady rate. It's not exponential. Part of the problem is that standard robots are very difficult to program. So I joke that the world does not sell 500,000 robots per year. It sells 500,000 robots one at a time every year, because there is so much programming and engineering that goes within it. So it's a scaling problem. What's happening now with the combination of AI and getting a more general kind of form factor is that you're going to be able to scale rapidly. And now it's no longer a frog being boiled. I mean, we're being thrown right in the frying pan right away. And the other thing people have to realize, there's also this question, it's like, what's the definition of a recession versus a depression? And the joke is, a recession is when your neighbor loses their job. A depression is when you lose your job. So again, it's a matter of perspective when people looking at it. It's like, if it's not affecting me, I'm not going to be worried about it. But when they start seeing these things coming in, I think suddenly there will be that shock. It's like, oh my God, this time it really is different. That these bots are going to be able to take over many, many tasks very, very quickly, because they are really designed to be scalable. And remember, all these robot companies are not looking combined to produce 500,000 robots a year. Each one of them is hoping within a few years to be able to scale up to close to 1 million or more robots each. And we have many of them out there. So we're going to quickly be going to millions, tens of millions, potentially hundreds of millions. And then by the end of 2030, probably billions of these. It's going to have a huge impact on the economy in ways that I say economists don't even understand. I don't even think they know how to model it. So we can sit here and try to model it. The analogy I like to use is from physics, that Einstein's equations predicts the black hole, and he can get it to the event horizon, but he doesn't know, we can't figure out what happens beyond the event horizon. We know in there is a singularity. And again, they keep on talking about AI being a singularity. I feel the same thing is happening. We're approaching this event horizon, and as you approach an event horizon, you begin to feel disruptions. You begin to notice that something different is happening to the space around us. And I think we're going to be sort of seeing that same thing as we're launching in, which is why we need to have a game plan now and not say, oh, let's wait till we go to cross the event horizon and then figure out what's going to work. We need to start thinking, what are the scenarios that are going to be in there? Because if we don't, we won't be able to chart those waters properly.
Yeah, and it's not just the AI event horizon. There are two intersecting event horizons, really.
Yeah.
One is AI, and the other is embodied AI, right, in humanoid bots. So, Scott, you've kind of been suggesting that we shouldn't only focus on unemployment rates, but also on wage stagnation. And we talked about what's happening in rural America. When you hear what Scott is saying, what are the sectors that you're seeing this pattern repeating itself and more clearly? And how is this changing the argument from job replacement to kind of economic justice?
Okay, so again, looking back over like decades of data, you can see that like the way automation has been impacting even until now has been kind of like a coring out of the middle class. And the reason why is because let's say you create a manufacturing robot for like producing cars or whatever. And that makes sense because that job was someone getting paid like, a median wage. They were getting paid well, just to go to high school even. They were going to have this job that paid well. And so if you have like a good paying job, then you can't replace it with like a cheap robot. It has to have like an expensive robot. So these jobs that have been impacted for the past few decades have been a lot of these middle class kind of manufacturing low wage jobs. So you can even see these charts that show like, again, our productivity, our overall like manufacturing production has been going up and up and up. And the jobs tied to production have been going down. So people even, they'll say, oh, we need to bring manufacturing back to the US. It's like, well, what does it even mean? Because we do have manufacturing in the US. We're manufacturing more than ever. It's just we don't have people doing those jobs because there's fewer people needed. And so what we're looking at now is as you bring in these kind of multi-purpose robots that are cheaper, then it makes more sense suddenly to, if they have the capability and at the right cost, and you can replace these lower paying jobs. So now you're actually, for the first time, really, I would say, like, kind of concerned about what happens when you're actually replacing these, $20,000 jobs, these $15,000 jobs, like these like consumer based economy, service sector kind of jobs. And that's when you start to see that we go beyond this coring out of the middle class, in which case those people lost their jobs and then they either went up to the top and found better paying jobs, or they went to lower paying jobs. That's why we're not like seeing like mass unemployment. But then what happens when you start to like reduce those lower paying jobs?
It's so true that what sort of happened is that in the automotive sectors, when the robots came in, they had to have a return on investment. So they were generally going in those areas that could be automated, and also where the cost of doing it at that point, the people were being paid a pretty high wage. The robots aren't cheap and the engineering is not cheap. So they kind of went in there, and as you can say, the ROI meant you were hitting those jobs that were paying a lot. The ones that were really down the pay scale, it just wasn't worth it. The robots are just too expensive to go in there to get that return on investment. So yeah, they kind of get hollowed out. And then, the other is that part of the ROI of a robot also goes to the quality that you get. So you get like this consistency. So if you can produce a quality product, you don't have to worry about the returns and all the costs that kind of go on there. So it's a pretty complicated one. So, but when you go down to lower paying jobs, they're not really doing anything that's affecting the quality. They may somehow slow it down. So if you're just loading sheet metal, that's not going to affect the end product. Either the sheet metal is defective or it's not. And you're not screwing it up by taking it out of the bin and putting it in there. And then the robot welds it correctly and stuff like that. You could do something that you're kind of slow, so the line slows down, but that generally doesn't happen. So those are jobs that they're not going to go after. And plus, it looks so darn easy, but it's so darn hard to automate. Because if it could have been automated,
it would have been. Yeah. A lot of jobs would be awesome to automate away. I mean, who wouldn't have to stop mowing the lawn or taking care of the trash or whatever? There are a lot of jobs that Yeah, exactly. There are a lot of jobs that we won't miss from yeah. But then the question is, where will we fill them up? And you were mentioning that it was like middle class jobs that usually disappeared before, and maybe I'm biased, but perhaps they were easier to kind of move into other positions. Or do you think where do you think we would end up with this? On one hand, it would be nice to get rid of those jobs.
Yeah.
But if you do not share the spoils, then
so there's two different ways of looking at this that kind of bring you to different conclusions. And so I just want to highlight both of those. And it's that, so if we're thinking about like this world with no jobs, so like let's say, oh, there's going to be so much automation and so much deployment of robots so quickly, so vastly, that 80% of jobs will be automated, in some short-ish time horizon. And if you're thinking about it that way, then you're thinking, oh my gosh, like people have to have like large income replacements, or what are we going to do? Like you're thinking it's not going to work. Like that system can't work without people getting paid, $80,000 a year at least, or something really high, because how does it make sense? Like, are all these people going to die? Like, what are you going to do with like massive unemployment? And if you're thinking about that, then when I'm talking about UBI of like, $1,500 per month, of like, $15,000 a year, you're thinking, I can't live on that. That's crazy. That doesn't solve the problem either. Like, what are we going to do? And then the other side of this is, okay, we don't know what's going to happen with automation. We don't know how quickly, we don't know the total impact's going to be. We do know there's going to be something. But also, I would say, who should benefit from this? Like, I see those robots in those videos and they're doing stuff, and it's like, well, that robot should work literally for all of us. So we should all see some kind of dividend from that. Like these robot paychecks should go to us, and we need it too, because how do we pay for what they're doing if we're not getting some buying power in order to pay it? So if you're looking at it from the dividend perspective,
the robot companies pay, or the companies that deploy them?
I'm saying we as a society should see that these like, humanoid robots and AI and software and stuff are doing human jobs. And therefore we should all benefit from that, particularly because where did all the original R&D funding come from? It came from like taxpayer dollars. A lot of this stuff is publicly funded R&D at the very beginning. And also, if we've got these people, these robots doing these jobs, how are we supposed to pay for this? Like, we have to make sure in a capitalist system that consumers maintain buying power. So if we just make sure that, okay, we deserve a dividend and we make sure people have a buying power because of the dividend, it still works. And then, of course, you can just say, all right, however much happens in the future, we can just like index the UBI to productivity or something, so that as they produce more and more, then humans benefit more and more from that and are able to purchase what those machines are doing. And that can scale up to wherever we want to. And I think those are the two different ways of looking at it.
Okay. And the side effect would be, I guess, that everything would be a lot cheaper if they manufacture it.
Thank you, Gustav. That's a perfect segue to what I want to open this question to the panel. Let's take a vote. Who among us believes in this promise, this dream of the age of abundance that AI and robotics is going to bring?
Yeah, it's going to be great. As long as we make sure it's great.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, the opportunity is there. It's never been.
Okay, so if it's going to be great, then do we still need a UBI?
Yes, because we're not going to share it. Inequality will grow from this. So yes, it can be beneficial to have all these robots and stuff doing this work. But if only 5 people own, multi-mega-trillion-dollar corporations and they're mega-trillionaires, like, how does that mean that we all benefit? It's just going to be
shareholders of those companies.
That requires shares.
It's going to be in their interest, because the people who own the humanoid companies are not going to be building these bots out of charity. They're building because people are going to be purchasing from them, who are going to be businesses, and the businesses need them because the businesses are producing product that people are buying. And obviously, if that all collapses, then no one's going to need the humanoid bots, which means the humanoid bot companies have nothing. So in a sense, it's really in their interest to make sure there is some way to get stuff going through the economy. And they're referring to everything as like robot as a service, but at the same time, they're talking about it as being like a labor on demand. So, they're already saying these robots are going to be doing labor. It's like, well, wait a minute. Right now, we already have a method for taxing labor, that anyone who goes out and works, they pay a little bit. And so you could almost say, well, can't maybe just start doing the same thing with the robots? So you just need to bring that in. That would start to bring in some sort of tax base. And then you could use that for everything from retraining programs to UBI and everything else. Because it's going to be a complicated mixture. I don't know how you balance it all out, but it's going to have to be. And UBI is going to be a component in there somehow.
Will there be need for retraining? I mean, if in the vision of AI being supreme and the bots being better than us, what can we actually train to be, in the old sense, beneficial to society? Aside from
to hike, to I don't,
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, basically to learn to paint. I suppose there's, we're going to need retraining on how to maybe enjoy life.
What if you really want to work?
I guess that's what it is. We're going to need training to not be bored.
What if you derive pleasure from labor?
Have to come in. Because I've gone on beach vacations and they get pretty boring after like a week. It's just like I could not imagine doing that for like 5 years straight. I would be bored to death.
Exactly. It's a joy to be creative, not just in an abstract manner, but also with your hands. Whether it's,
I agree. But when the
when
the retraining program is meant to make us productive to society, because that's what it's like. You need to have a job, to have a meaning, not for myself, but from society's point of view. Even in Sweden, where we have this quite lenient social systems all over the place, it's very strongly connected to work and the work ethic, and that you're only as good as how hard you're working. So I guess it's an old Lutheran idea that work hard and you will be blessed or whatever.
No, but it's not just for you in the Nordic countries. I think this is. I think I've grown up in India, so I mean, and across South Asia and Asia, especially. I mean, you've heard the whole thing of the tiger mom and the helicopter parents and all, and you're literally groomed from childhood to be a super achiever. So then, if the super achievers are AI and robotics, just to take your point forward, Gustav, and echo it in the part of the world that I come from, it's the same feeling. How do we deal with this situation?
So there's like a fork here, and it depends, I would say, on UBI or not. And so what I see is we can have a future where, let's say, take a sushi restaurant. I love sushi. I love going there. Like for my birthday dinner, I will request to go to like a nice sushi restaurant because I just love it. And that will continue being true even with robot sushi chefs. Like we can already get robot sushi. You can go to the grocery store and pick up sushi that's been created by a robot. And that doesn't mean that I want that. It's cheaper, and there you go. And that's the difference. So I think there will be a human premium where let's say it's like, how we spend more money for organic vegetables and fruits and stuff versus non-organic. Like human labor will be like the new organic, and then robots will be just normal stuff. It'll be cheaper. But people need buying power. So people need the money to actually pay humans to do that. And as long as humans are exchanging with other humans the money, there are still those jobs.
In my field, it will be the opposite. I mean, do you want the human surgeon or the amazing robotic surgeon?
Gustav, you're reading.
I have a human touch.
There are some cases, like that. I'm talking more about these kinds of more, these passion-driven pursuits, and where people
or the AI,
really
this crazy wave of AI chatbots for mental health. There are literally hundreds of millions of people, and I don't know how many people know this, but there are literally hundreds of millions of people around the world that are using everything from the free version of ChatGPT to specialized AI chatbots for mental health. And I often kind of wrestle with this. Are we moving towards a two-tiered society where, as you rightly pointed out, Scott, Mr. Santens, And Gustav just touched upon it. There's a human premium, but that human premium is only for a select few. And what does that do for human-to-human interaction and society?
Well, what's so interesting about your example too is, mental health, is that there's a lot of poor mental health out there because people are stressed out and living lives of economic insecurity. And that's actually only increasing thanks to automation. There's actually even a study that looked at the impacts of automation in regards to people's mental health, and saw just people, worried about it. It wasn't even people like losing their jobs to automation yet. It's just worrying about it. But so if we had a basic income, we would definitely see improved mental health. Like we've seen that result over and over and over again. And just people are just stressed out. You need to have that feeling of like solid stability and security. That makes a big difference. And then the other weird thing about this is, did you see just like what just happened when ChatGPT 5 was released, and people were just freaking out that they lost like essentially their therapist or friend in the form of 4.0.
Oh, the therapist, no.
Like, yeah, so people...
I was freaking out because I lost 4.0.
But people were using 4.0 as like a therapist, and so it changed.
Yes, yeah.
So just imagine like if even more people are using this as a therapist, and then it changes.
And Scott. Gustav,
I think the other thing you have to look at is that work will be optional. It's not that people won't work. They can work and do the jobs they want. And again, a lot of times people are doing the jobs because it's not optional, because they have to. That's why they don't like it. But there are a lot of people who love being waiters, and they would love being a waiter even more if it's not something they actually had to do to support themselves, if they would just kind of do it occasionally. A lot of people, when they're retired, they get so bored, they go out and they volunteer to do all these things because they want to do something.
Oh, absolutely.
For the most part, they love it because they know they don't have to be paid for this. They're doing something they're passionate with. And I even had like my own example is the first job I had after I got my doctorate was I was a dishwasher at a local restaurant. My neighbor, she owned the place, and she needed help because everyone was graduating that weekend. And I loved doing it. And then I also was like a waiter there a few times. I didn't need it, but it was like, it was fun. I was always asking her, it's like, do you need help Friday night? This was kind of fun. So again, a lot of people will find that now that they don't have the burden of having to support themselves and pay the bills and everything, they'll probably just say, you know what? I wonder what it would be like to be a chef. I wonder what it would be like to be a waiter. I wonder what it would be like to maybe be a carpenter or something like that. And just do these things because you've got an interest in it. And then they will all, of course, be part of this. If you want to call it a premium pool, I don't think so. I think what will probably be a lot easier to actually find restaurants manned by people serving other people, and the restaurant and the waiters, well, they'll actually either be friendly unless you want them to be rude. If you want the full Parisian experience,
you pay extra.
So people will probably actually enjoy the restaurant experience a bit more because everyone's going to be that's working there is doing it because they like it. That's what they want to do.
Yeah.
I just liked about the old Andrew Yang speech back in the day when he ran the idea of taking the chance of open up a bakery or whatever. Like you're not afraid of going bankrupt or losing all your savings just because you wanted to try this, knowing that you had this funding behind you. You could fall back, or you could try something new and do what your heart's desire.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah. Gustav, you may know this, and that this is something I've noticed because my parent company is over in Finland, and I've noticed other people actually write about it when they've been over there and everything, is that Finland is considered to be a very, very socialist country because you don't have to they have an excellent education system, as everyone knows. All you have to do is get into college. You don't have to pay for that. You don't have to worry about your medical bills. Retirement is basically the same for everyone. So you don't have to, you can leave one job and go to another and not worry about your pension and everything going. And yet the Finns may complain about all things, but you know what? They are actually more entrepreneurial than in the US. Finns open up companies like crazy because they don't have to worry about that. They say, I've got an idea. I want to start a job. Oh, what am I going to do about the healthcare we have right now? My wife is expecting. I've got a child at 17. How am I going to pay for their colleges? You go down that list, and that's why a lot of very, very smart Americans don't start companies because they're afraid to do that. They really cannot do that. And so you can see some form of social support like that can actually result in an economy which is way more capitalistic and way more entrepreneurial than you would typically expect.
Yeah, I mean, entrepreneurship is a very frequent seen in saturation pilots for basic income, and it's easy to see why once you think about it. Which is that imagine someone is, there's someone who's just they're not risk averse, they're willing to take the risk, and they have access to capital. They start a business, and the question is, does that business succeed or not? What makes it succeed? Um, you can make a great product, but if you don't have any customers, then you're not going to sell it. And also, just because it's a great product doesn't mean that people will be able to afford to buy it, because it depends on if they have it. So in these saturation pilots, you're not just creating these entrepreneurs, you're creating customers, because the entire like village or town or whatever also gets that money. And once they have that money, they spend it at those businesses the entrepreneurs start. And that's why it's so successful there. And it would be very different if they were just to give that one entrepreneur like a loan to start up a business. That business could fail. So it's really important to make sure that you have that consumer spending power. And again, I think that is why UBI actually improves the way capitalism works, is because you're actually making sure that people can signal demand.
Yeah. Okay. So we've been focusing a lot on physical labor and the disruption of the workforce, but it's not just that, and it's not just embodied AI, because there's also cognitive work, creativity, decision making. So when you look at sectors like banking, finance, creative industries, Mr. Santens, what makes this disruption qualitatively different from the past technological shifts or disruptions in the industrial revolutions that we've seen in the past? Isn't that like a danger that we kind of not just caught on to?
It's tough. Like I will definitely say it's different, but also I feel that making that argument, it's an argument that is, I think, weaker, just because people will just say people have always said it's different, and then so we're like, no, now it really is different. And even though I do believe that, if you're someone who just wants to ignore what's happening, you'll just say, well, people have always said that. So I don't know. Like, to me, I can give you reasons why I think it's different, but also people will they don't care. I will say it's different is because this is a different kind of labor. This is like cognitive labor. This is mind labor.
Yeah.
And we've never been able to do that before.
Yeah.
And I mean, the speed that it's happening. I started playing around with this Mid-Journey and this image creating bots maybe 2 years ago. And when I asked it for a cat, I got a Picasso picture that perhaps was a cat. Now when I ask it for a cat, I get a video of it jumping around playing in the grass after a few seconds. And also this gaming industry, it's the same. I mean, there are a lot of 3D modeling YouTubers who are now making videos about how do you survive as a 3D modeler in the future, because they start to realize, why would I spend 5 hours modeling a chair when I could just ask for a freshly modeled chair by an AI? And there are then those who will say, oh, you will just be more creative. You will make 10 chairs in the same time. But I mean, why would you hire me to make a chair when anyone can write chair as a prompt?
Influencers, for that matter, as well.
Yeah. And soon the video games will just be me prompting, I want to play a game that looks like, I don't know, Terminator 2, the movie, where I am the main character. And then you will play that game because it will be automatically created by the AI. And sure, maybe there are other jobs for all those people involved in creating those games or those videos or movies. But I mean, the speed is going to go so fast. It's not going to be as the machine just said, one bot a year. It's going to be everything in a few weeks and a month.
Yeah, and I mean, our generations are, well, I mostly stand accused of being slow to change and adopt new technologies. But when I look at like teenagers and kids today, and I love to tell the story. Way back in 2023, for one of the first episodes I was prepping for on this podcast, was about creative tools, right? ChatGPT had just come out. And then people were creating images with it, and it was wild back then because it blew everyone's mind. I was prepping for a chat with a creative artist, and my daughter was on the sofa next to me, and she was playing around on her tab, and she said, "Papa, look at this," and she'd created an animated version of Red Riding Hood, and it just blew my mind. And she told me that, and she was what, I think 8 or 9 at that time, and she was like, all her friends were using these AI knockoff tools of ChatGPT. So the adoption rates vary so much across generations. Are we kind of missing something there? Or, I mean, because, I mean, we tend to be slower in adopting technologies. There's a whole different adoption rate amongst kids and teenagers.
Yeah, it's also funny to see that they're choosing differences. They're choosing different things. So like I was just looking at like the adoption of various LLMs, and I just thought it was interesting that like my age group prefers OpenAI's, ChatGPT and stuff, and then like the youngest demographic is more like, I think it was Grok, or maybe it was Claude, I don't know, but like we're all kind of like choosing our own preferences too, and how we're actually making this stuff. But yeah, I mean, sure, kids these days they'll adopt it quickly, but also at the same time we're seeing like the youngest are kind of the most pushback to AI as well. Like they're the ones who are saying it is immoral to use it. Like there are environmental impact concerns, and they're also worried about the impact on people. And so you see a lot of the young even saying, I refuse to use this. Like I actually think that a lot of this stuff is bad. Social media is bad. I'm going to put my phone down. I'm going to hang out with other people, and I'm going to like purposely not do that. Which is kind of weird to see, like the youngest and maybe like the oldest kind of feeling that way too.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
I mean, it's good in a way, perhaps because there's, it's gone past that curve, the initial craze of the adoption, and then there's some perspective now. Hopefully,
or they're shooting themselves in the foot and getting left behind.
it's a tough choice.
It's also, I find it very weird to see this already kind of like, it's like a climate change denialism, but with AI. And it's coming mostly from the left right now, is that you'll see...
You're a climate change believer, by the way.
Climate change believer. Yeah, I hope so. But so you have people denying the impacts that AI is having. They'll say, look, AI can't do anything. All of it's just hype. It can't actually accomplish anything. If you are an expertise in some certain sector, then you will look at whatever LLM or whatever doing that job and say it can't do that, and therefore it can't do mine. It can't do other people. It's all just hype. It's just a bubble. It'll burst. It's not going to go anywhere. And then they'll have other reasons saying, oh, environmental and stuff, whatever. But like, it's just weird to me to see that there's a significant percentage of people. It's politically polarized over. It's already politically polarized to actually look at, is AI doing anything right now? Which I think is scary, because for those of us who are really interested in, is it doing something right now? We're already seeing this start to happen, especially when it comes to like entry-level jobs. Seems to be where this impact is kind of the largest, the fastest. And I just think it's scary. It's scary to me that we're already like denying this.
What really scares me about this discussion about the public discourse around AI and robotics and these intersecting waves of disruption. And Scott, the machine, I want you to weigh on this, please. Are we having the right discussions? Is public discourse focused in the right direction right now? I mean, it might seem as an obvious answer, but from your perspective.
I see it's in a lot of different bubbles that, on this channel and everything, we talk a lot about AI and robotics, and we just assume everyone knows. But then when I start talking to relatives and others, lots of friends, they have no idea. They maybe heard of ChatGPT, so there's a lot of people that haven't really used it. And that's kind of concerning because it seems like a lot of people are missing out on the conversation, understanding it's just going to overwhelm it when it happens. You can kind of see the difference in the media in China right now, that they have robots running around. They already are kind of preparing the society for the idea. And you have so many shows that are going on, trade shows or conferences that are going on. You're seeing it constantly on what looks like Chinese media and news. Whereas in the US, it's really a dribble that's kind of going through. And that means we are not going to be as prepared as I think we should be when you begin to see these robots running around.
Gustav, quick question to you. Since we're talking about, I wanted to go back to the human premium question. You're a doctor, a hand surgeon. Would you be okay with AI diagnosing you or going to an AI doctor, a virtual doctor, or how do you think about it?
I mean, Sweden, the system we have, it's very slow to adapt these changes. It's like county based. It's not, the private healthcare is existing, but it's not as big. So it's a very slow change here. I think most within the field are starting to accept that diagnostics is, no one is going to beat the AI at this time if you provide it with the right data. And when it comes to imaging, there are, it's not, well, certain AI are there, but when you upload a obvious fracture to the Grok, for instance, it does not diagnose it correctly. So, but I think it's just a matter of time. And then it's easy for me as a surgeon to say, well, my handcraft will be ages before they adapt, but probably not. But I would definitely, I know colleagues who use it to help them in their diagnostics. If you get stuck, you look in a book. If you can't find it in a book, you ask a friend. If the friend doesn't know, you Google it or you check the chat, and it gives you the pointers. Then, of course, you'll have to fact check it, and it will point you in the right direction. But there are definitely a lot of colleagues already using it. And there are so many things where it could alleviate our stress with, like automatic writing out of our dictations or our patient visits and prescriptions and everything could be so much easier and safer if it was adopted. But I think that's similar to, or at least the medical union, or what, like the expert, what do you call it, the colleagues of the medical field will oppose it to not lose a job. And we have a strong like union that would say, oh yes, we can use the software, but there will always have to be a medical doctor who looks at the results and says if it's right or not.
So supervisory.
Yeah, I think that will take a long time before, at least in Sweden, before that is taken away. But then, of course, I could diagnose 100 patients in the time of one. Probably, I don't even have to see them. So
yeah, but then that's the whole thing. That's the whole disruption, right? Because if we're reduced to being supervisors and managers, just think of the disruption and think of the job losses.
Yeah, and I mean, I trust myself more than other specialists in certain fields at times, which is a bit cocky. But I mean, I know what I know, and I know what I don't know. And if I meet someone who I feel that they are not in the right area, then I will question them. Whereas with the AI, of course, I still question that. But it will definitely speed up our work as soon as we adopt it. But we haven't yet really in Sweden.
Yeah. But also from the other side, from the other view is that of patients, right? And I've been coming across so many stories of the impact of democratization of medical knowledge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
right.
And I think
I came across this recent case, forget where exactly, but there was this woman who was speaking about her experience of advocacy. She was a cancer survivor, and she spoke of how she, with the help of AI, researched about her condition and was able to advocate for certain lines of medication, etc., or treatment, and that was great for her.
Yeah, I think so. And it was really stressful for a lot of colleagues back when Googling things was becoming a big thing, because you could always get second guessed, and the patients usually arrived with their own diagnosis. So that was like a whole new problem field of the GPs, like how do I tackle this kind of patient, and when is it reasonable to do a full body MRI or CAT scan? That became more and more the job of the physician in Sweden, like being reasonable about diagnostics, because we all share in the same pot of money. We can't do full scan MRIs of everyone. So, and now it's even more, I guess, not stressful, but we need to become more humble with our knowledge, because they will always beat us. They have all the textbooks available. We have forgotten things. So,
yeah. So, Scott, Santens, you've been kind of clear. I mean, and I'm coming to your own personal experience with UBI, because you've kind of lived on crowdfunded basic income, I believe, since 2015, right?
Yeah.
So, what's your experience like? And based on this, how do you see the pilot programs that have been deployed? What are the key design elements that you think? Like, what's the starting point politically and economically for a viable universal basic income program?
Okay, so through my own experience, and this is like soon after Patreon was launched, I looked at it and thought I might be able to like crowdfund a monthly basic income through this. Like this is a mechanism where that becomes possible. And so I started that process in late 2014, and then it took until January of 2016 for me to raise that up to over $1,000 per month, which is what had been my goal at the time. And one of the first things I learned from that process was that at even like as low as like around $200 to $300 per month, I already felt this like feeling of greater security. And I think it came from, it's not like I was ever, in fear of going hungry or anything like that, but like having that floor meant that that fear was like gone, because it wasn't like I was working for an employer who could fire me, and it wasn't like any kind of fear of like a single source, because it was spread out, it was crowdfunded. So I had, I don't know how many at the time, 300 or 400 or something, patrons. And so if one patron decided to stop, then, I'm barely impacted. So it was a real like secure, stable floor. And I was just kind of surprised that even something as low as $200 per month could actually have this kind of security increasing impact just from taking kind of hunger off the table. And so when I'm asked, like, what should we start at? I will say, well, I would prefer that we would, just end poverty by going, okay, what's the poverty line? And then going there and having that be the start. But also I'm totally happy with starting somewhere much lower than that. Like, let's just, as long as it's fully universal and as long as it's unconditional, then great. Start at $200 per month for everybody. Start at 100, start at 300, like whatever is politically feasible. I would say start there. Just make sure that it's universal, and then just make sure you can, you can always grow it from there. I would even, like, if I'm going to say optimal implementation, I would say set it to something like GDP per capita, so that everybody's actually getting a legit specific share of the overall economy. In which case, 18% of GDP per capita here in the US is the poverty line. I would set it at like 20 to 25%. So it's a little bit above that. But then that way, everyone actually is happy about automation. Like bring on the productivity increases, because then my income goes up. Like there has to be that kind of coupling between productivity and the UBI. And then I think that has these profound, actually, automation improving, accelerating kind of impact if everybody feels they share in that.
Okay, so quick poll again around the panel and start with you, Scott. Who pays for it, or who pays the largest chunk towards such a program?
Well, so I don't like that question of who pays for it, because first of all, like when it comes to, federal spending, those are public dollars. And when it comes to like where federal spending comes from, it doesn't come from taxes. It comes from just out of nowhere. It's federal spending. Taxation actually just removes the money from the money supply. So it's like creation and deletion instead of this like taxing and transfer over and over and over again. And on the one hand, it doesn't seem like that much difference to say like, okay, if you spend $1 billion and you tax $1 billion, is it different from taxing $1 billion and then spending $1 billion? But I think it is important, because then it starts to get to the question of, well, we issue this federal spending in the interest of all of us? And what is it that our economic capacity can do? Like, what is it that we can actually achieve? What do we have the resources for? What do we have the technology for? What do we have the people and the skills for? Like, if you're looking at it from that perspective, then it's more like, can we actually achieve this? And then the question is, what are the best taxes in order to manage inflation, inequality, and nudge behavior with incentives and disincentives in the directions that we want? Like, that's the kind of questions that I want to get to. And I also want us to think at, what is the cost of not doing this? You know, like, if we don't do UBI, then what happens if democracy disappears? You know, what if fascism takes over? Like, what is the cost of that? You know, what is the cost of poverty? Well, we're spending over $1 trillion per year on child poverty alone right now. We're spending over $1 trillion a year on crime.
Well, you know,
So,
that's one of
we gotta
the
look at that.
that's a real fear, because at least in America, you know, the country being taken over and managed by the tech bros of Silicon Valley is a very real fear, a very real concern.
Yeah. So when I'm asked, like, what kind of taxation do like I approve of, or what my design of the policy be, I would say, like, well, we can start with just replacing the standard deduction here in the US with a refundable standard credit. Like, it's a kind of a boring kind of tax mechanism to go from, you know, what is the difference between a deduction and a credit? But a deduction actually helps those with higher incomes more, whereas a credit actually helps those with lower incomes more.
Right.
So just switch to a deduction to credit. And that you can do like a revenue neutral or deficit neutral UBI by just replacing the standard deduction, but somewhere around $300 per month or so. So then it's a low amount.
Right.
And then I think we should have tax reforms. We can just, you know, have some higher brackets. I think a wealth tax makes sense. I think that when it comes to going from like income taxes to other taxes, you know, I think something like a transaction tax on like a small, tiny transaction tax on like every transaction, to me makes sense, because then like it's a very small thing and we're no longer taxing income, and then we're actually taxing the economy instead of taxing work. I think, you know, stuff like taxing land value makes sense. I think taxing, you know, Pigovian taxes, carbon taxes, like, we want to tax things that we want less of. In general, I want us to do that, and to get away from even what we're doing with income taxes. But yeah, there's so many ways of going about this.
Yeah. So, Scott the Machine, that sounds a lot like government policy-led programs. From your perspective, your experience, and you track the humanoid industry so closely, where do you think humanoid companies would stand in this question?
I'm sure they thought about it, but I'm not aware of there being really many public statements about it. I think a few are trying to put together, you know, some sort of discussions in this area of how would you be able to transfer whatever income these bots are making more to the public good, and realizing that it's inevitable, it's going to happen. We already have stuff kind of like this that people may not be aware of, is that usually we think is that we tax people but not equipment. But in a lot of counties, they do exactly that. They go through and you have to do an inventory of all the equipment you have. So like laptops that you would have in business or something like that will have like a small property tax on it. So the same thing that if you get machining equipment, all those are there. So it's kind of like a form of income tax on those, because they are kind of labor saving devices. So that's there. So I would say that there already is precedence for that. It's just a question of finding out what's the right balance you want to have in there. And if you start seeing the humanoids as being laborers, then you would just say, okay, if that replaces a worker that's there already, then it should be taxed as if it was the same worker. Now, there'll still be obviously return on investment, because how much does the employer pay on taxes versus the salary? Well, you know, maybe 15, 25%, something like that. So they still are getting maybe 75% benefit out of that. that they would be able to go towards whatever the cost is of operating the robot.
Just want to point out, just because we're talking about what they might prefer as far as like those creating the AI and robots. I think Sam Altman's approach that he suggested a few years ago in a blog post. I think that's a nice way of going about it too. What he said is, you could create like a sovereign wealth fund in the U.S. And you would just issue. You would have every corporation that's a public corporation with stock, issue new stock into that fund every year. So let's say 1% of stock would be newly created each year, go into the fund, and then that could actually issue a dividend that goes to everybody, in which case that directly ties this growth in the economy, in the stock market especially, to everybody. And then you're not directly taxing, only technology, because, if you're in that, then you would want to get out of that and say, well, let's have everyone do that. So I think that's a good approach. That's one way. And he also likes the land value tax too, because again, it's not a direct tax of technology, but so much of like the benefits actually go into buying up assets, and a lot of that goes into land. And of course, that just makes land more expensive. So one way to actually have both cheaper housing and less inequality and paying for, UBI is actually that mechanism.
Interesting. Gustav, what's the view from Europe?
Yeah, well, I don't know. I always go with my quote that I'm a doctor and not a mathematician, and even if I put out my math cap, I'm not sure that I can solve this equation. But I mean, I like the point of view of like consumption tax, or we have a really high VAT or VAT, moms we call it in Sweden. So maybe not increase that, but I think that's a good way of doing it. At least, what do we not want to? I'll put it the other way so you can see the regional sign, gang sign. What do we not want to that people overconsume, like carbon tax? And I like Scott Machine's idea of we already have something in place for equipment and stuff like that. So I'm not going to be the one to pitch in. I mean, I think in Europe we have high taxation in general, and also hidden taxes such as the VAT and so on. So people are, I think in Sweden we're quite okay with it because it's the way we've been brought up. Of course, depending on what island of the political spectrum you're on, you're more or less okay with it. But we reap the benefits. I mean, free education, free healthcare, free almost everything, and we more or less have a kind of UBI. If you end up on the streets, you will be well taken care of if you want to. On the other hand, it's not universal. It's not. I preferred your word. It's not it's
unconditional.
Not unconditional, exactly. Yeah. I almost prefer that term, because for it to be accepted, it needs to be unconditional and universal. It needs to be something that is not directly connected to my salary or my land value, for that matter. Also, I think would be very sensitive in Sweden. Everyone likes their cottage or whatever. So, but I think there are ways to do it, and we've gotten some really good examples.
Let's just look at one final area before we wrap this discussion up. And I'm talking about the geopolitics of AI and robotics and these intersecting waves of disruption. You've got the United States and China. Both seem to be hurtling towards or along this path of disrupting their economies and transforming their economies with AI, robotics, automation. Correct me if I'm wrong, that China is perhaps a little ahead of America right now when it comes to deploying robots for automation and deploying AI. So how do you view this competing geopolitics between America, the American economy, and the Chinese economy?
It's going to be very interesting because there's a good chance there'll be barriers between both economies. So it's not clear how much Chinese automation will actually make it onto American shores. I have a feeling a lot of it will probably make it into the European shores, depending upon things like software, what kind of restrictions there might be on that. But it's going to affect everyone. So even if there's no such thing as sitting on the sidelines. So everyone talks about, well, it's going to be the United States and it's going to be China, and they forget, well, there's Africa, there's South America, there's Europe, there's a lot of these other countries that are going to be impacted one way or another. So if suddenly the US or China is able to produce, some textiles or something like that incredibly cheaply, well, what about all these other countries that right now that is an important source of whatever it is that they produce? They're going to be impacted. So it's definitely going to have global repercussions. And that a lot of these other countries, which might think, oh, that's just these two superpowers kind of going at it, we can just bury your head in the sand and not worry about it. No, it's going to come to your shores whether you want it to be there or not. And they need to start thinking about how do they brace for it and how do they participate in it. So rather than being a bystander, one to think about, well, how can we benefit from it? Are we able to create our own industries locally to be able to start producing our own bots that meet our own particular needs? Are we able to start developing software or do training or something like that? So there's a lot of potential that's there, and I would encourage all these countries to do it. But a lot of them are finding it very difficult because you've got two heavyweights. The US, which is just so strong in software, and Europeans are finding difficulty being able to compete with the US on that front. And then China, which is just so strong in manufacturing right now, and it doesn't look like it's going to abate. I mean, they just keep on going faster and faster and being able to produce more and more remarkable things. And the rest of the world is having a hard time being able to scale and keep up with that. But they need to, and they need to be aware of the economic repercussions that are going to come along with it.
Yeah, I think it was the 2026 or the 2027 robotics manifesto that the CCP brought out a while back. And to the best of my knowledge, I think they're looking at deploying robots from companies like Unitary across Europe. So Europe is a big target of Chinese companies, both for AI as well as embodied AI robotics. Gustav, I'm curious so there's this so much of a love-hate relationship, if I can call it, between Europe and China. They're wary of China, but they still need the technology. What's the view on this oncoming, or at least the Chinese intention to flood European markets with their AI and bots?
I think at least for Sweden and Scandinavia, there is a big resistance, or when it comes to the car industry, we know that their cars will be cheaper and they're probably better than the most European brands at the moment. But there's a big resistance to importing them and buying them, so they're putting extra taxation on them or whatever. So, and I think that goes for like Chinese technology in general. We probably don't realize that it's part of most of the things we're using in everyday life. But if it says Huawei or something else, there's a little bit more caution, and the same goes for these like Temu or whatever in society that's connected to China at the moment. So I don't know. I think that resistance will continue, but as one of the Scots just mentioned, there we will have to adapt to it and work with it. I mean, I don't see us catching up. There is no way that the EU will catch up to either China or the US when it comes to this field.
Yeah, and it's also a combination to a great extent of the demographic decline and rising labor costs, right? So, Scott, how do you then view the timeline of implementation of UBI programs in the light of this kind of geopolitical struggle for supremacy between the US and China on AI and robotics?
It makes me think of so one of the articles that I wrote, I think it was at least a year ago now, maybe 2 years ago, but it was about how China may end up being the first country to do a basic income. And people may think, well, that would never happen. And it's likely that if China did it, it's going to be not quite UBI, as in, is it going to be fully unconditional? Probably not in China, but I can see them doing fully universal. And I do see them, it would be entirely disconnected from work, and it would be per person. The question is, would it be cash, or would it be some kind of like electronic voucher that can only be spent on certain things, But I can see them directly issuing the ability to buy stuff. Like they're already having a demand problem there. They need a strong middle class that, our middle class is the envy of the world. they need that. And as soon as they realize that a basic income or something very much like it would be a solve, then I can see them doing that. And they would do it pretty quickly. They would just be like, oh, this makes sense, let's do it. So I'm kind of concerned about if China does that, because on the one hand, what's that going to look like exactly? And then what are people going to think about that in UBI? Are they going to think like that is UBI if it's not quite? But I do think that could actually create pressure for the US to do UBI. And I think that the US should also already be looking at UBI as being of strategic value against China, because we could actually accelerate AI adoption if people weren't so worried about the impacts, and if we actually leaned into the demand creation from UBI. So we could actually choose to accelerate this and beat China if we did that. But again, we're not looking at it from that perspective. I just think we should.
It's been wonderful chatting. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Scott Santens, Scott Walter, and Gustav Andersson. Thank you so much. Pleasure having you.
Thanks for having us.
Good seeing you again, Scott. Hi, Gustav.
Nice to meet you.